Amina Yusuf, a seemingly devoted wife, and Bashir Khan, her respected father-in-law, lived under one roof bound by tradition. But behind closed doors, their secret affair spiraled into a deadly conspiracy that would shatter an entire family forever. In a quiet London suburb lined with modest, semi-detached homes and well-kept gardens, Amina Yusuf lived what many would describe as an ideal life. At just 28, she was a mother of two and the wife of Farid Khan, a devoted and hard-working man. Farid worked long hours as an IT consultant in the city, commuting every day from the family home in Ilford. Their lives were structured and rooted in traditional values. Amina wore her hijab with pride, cooked for the household daily, and kept her children disciplined and respectful. Living under the same roof as Farid's father, Bashir Khan, was customary. In their culture, caring for elderly parents was an unspoken responsibility. The family followed Islam devoutly, and neighbors often described them as polite, private, and respectable. Amina had met Farid through an arranged introduction 6 years earlier. At the time, she had been living with her older brother in Birmingham after their parents passed away. The match seemed ideal. Farid was stable, kind, and came from a reputable family. Their marriage was quick, and within a year, Amina had given birth to their first child, a boy named Yusuf. 2 years later came their daughter, Zainab. From the outside, everything looked picture-perfect. But inside the 4-bedroom home, there were cracks no one saw. Farid, though loyal, was emotionally distant. He worked long hours, came home late, and spent his evenings buried in his laptop or on calls. Amina, who once thought marriage meant companionship and affection, found herself drifting into a life of routine and isolation. Conversations with Farid grew shorter. Physical affection faded. Her role as a wife began to feel more like that, of a live-in caretaker. Days blurred into one another, feeding the children, cleaning the house, preparing meals. Bashir, her father-in-law, was the only adult she saw regularly, and gradually the absence of emotional support from her husband created a dangerous vacuum. Bashir was not the strict elder people assumed he was, though he rarely spoke outside. The home, inside, he had a warm presence. He often praised Amina's cooking, made jokes to make her smile, and helped with the children when she seemed tired. Small moments of kindness, pulling a chair for her at dinner, offering her tea, complimenting. Her parenting slowly grew into longer conversations. Amina began to feel seen again, something she hadn't felt in years. These harmless moments at first didn't raise alarms, but over time, the emotional connection between Amina and Bashir began to blur the lines. She found herself thinking about him when he wasn't around, noticing the way he looked at her, how his mood changed when she entered the room. Bashir, too, seemed to linger longer in the kitchen, find excuses to speak to her, and smile in ways that felt more personal than appropriate. Amina knew these thoughts were dangerous. She prayed more often, hoping to clear her conscience. But something inside her had shifted. The loneliness she tried to suppress was being fed, slowly but surely, by someone she never imagined would play such a role in her life. And though no one outside that home could see it yet, the foundation of their so-called perfect family was starting to rot beneath the surface. It started with subtle glances and small gestures that could have been dismissed as innocent. But between Amina and her father-in-law Bashir, something unspoken had begun to grow. In the tight quarters of the Khan household, where privacy was rare and appearances mattered more than reality, Forbidden feelings festered behind closed doors. Amina, once committed to her role as a devoted wife and mother, found herself drawn to the only person who seemed to truly see her, someone she was never supposed to think of in that way. Bashir had spent years as a widower. Since the death of his wife, he had thrown himself into religious routines and family obligations. He was respected in the community and known for his calm demeanor. But behind that steady exterior was a man who felt invisible in his own home. His son had taken over the role of provider, and his grandchildren looked to him more as a fixture than a figure of authority. Amina's presence reawakened something in him, something he had pushed aside for years. The affair didn't begin with physical intimacy. It began with shared loneliness. Amina would make tea in the afternoon when the children napped, and Bashir would find his way into the kitchen to join her. Their conversations grew longer. They started sharing stories from their pasts, laughing at old memories. Bashir complimented her intelligence, her parenting, her patience. Amina blushed in response, her eyes lingering too long. These interactions felt harmless at first, but deep inside, both knew they were playing with fire. Eventually, they started creating opportunities to be alone. Bashir would offer to babysit while Amina ran errands, then insist she rest when she returned, encouraging her to sit with him and talk. When Farid was away at work, the house felt like a secret world where rules no longer applied. A hand on the shoulder lingered too long. A shared glance turned too intense. Then one evening, it crossed the line. A kiss, brief and hesitant, but enough to break every boundary that had once kept them apart. Once that line was crossed, there was no turning back. What had once been a lonely woman and a grieving man became something far more dangerous. They became partners in deception, hiding their affair in the shadows of tradition and trust. They communicated through notes tucked in books, deleted text messages, and silent signals passed during dinner. Amina began to lie to her husband, saying she had appointments, that the children needed to visit friends, or that she had joined a new women's prayer group. Farid believed every word. He trusted them both. But secrecy required more than lies. It demanded control of emotions, routines, and risks. Amina and Bashir became obsessed with avoiding suspicion, to the point where paranoia set in. Bashir installed new locks on the basement door. Amina stopped inviting friends over. Every creak in the hallway became a threat. Still, they continued, pulled by the thrill, by the feeling of being alive again. They believed no one knew. They believed they could keep this hidden forever. But secrets, especially the most dangerous ones, have a way of rotting everything they touch. And in their desperation to protect what they had, they didn't realize how many cracks were forming around them. Farid Khan had always been a man of routine. He left for work at the same time each morning, returned in the evening, and rarely deviated from his schedule. He trusted his family and had no reason to question the life he had built. But slowly, small things began to feel off. Amina seemed distracted. She was no longer affectionate, avoided eye contact, and appeared lost in thought even when surrounded by the children. Bashir, once warm and open with his son, became withdrawn and irritable, brushing off Farid's questions with brief answers. At first, Farid chalked it up to stress, maybe the pressure of raising kids or the weight of living in a shared household. But something didn't sit right. One evening, Farid came home early from work after a client meeting was canceled. As he stepped inside, he heard the faint sound of a voice note being played on Amina's phone. The voice was male, soft-spoken, and said something he couldn't quite make out. Amina jumped, quickly deleted the message, and claimed it was spam. Fareed didn't push. He let it go in that moment, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Over. The next few days, Fareed became more observant. He noticed how Amina would smile at her phone, then quickly hide the screen when he walked into the room. Bashir, too, seemed uneasy, avoiding being in the same room with his son for too long. Late one night, Fareed checked Amina's phone while she slept. Her call logs had been cleared. Her chat apps were empty, every message thread deleted. That alone might have meant nothing to someone else, but to Fareed, it screamed of something being hidden. Not wanting to accuse anyone without proof, Fareed decided to gather evidence. He bought a small hidden camera disguised as a plug adapter and installed it in the guest room, a place Amina often cleaned during the day when no one else was around. He placed another camera in the hallway outside the basement, an area rarely used. Days passed, and Fareed checked the footage at night after everyone had gone to sleep. For a while, there was nothing unusual, until he saw it. Bashir entering the guest room during the afternoon while Amina stood at the doorway, locking it behind them. The footage had no sound, but the body language was unmistakable. They were close, too close. Fareed's stomach turned as he watched. The woman he loved, the father he trusted, now reduced to something he couldn't comprehend. The betrayal was deep, and the pain cut sharper than he expected. But instead of confronting them, Fareed decided to keep watching. He wanted more evidence, more answers. He began documenting everything: dates, times, footage. He even started confiding in a trusted co-worker, unsure of what to do next. The situation became unbearable. Each day, he came home and played the role of the unsuspecting husband, while inside, he was unraveling. The house felt colder, the walls closer, and the air heavier. But Fareed held on, thinking he was in control. What he didn't know was that someone else had sensed his change in behavior. And behind his back, another plan had already begun to form, one that would turn the tension into something far worse than he could ever imagine. Rain poured over the quiet neighborhood as sirens pierced the night. It was just past midnight when the first call came in, neighbors reporting screams and crashing sounds from the Khan residence. Within minutes, police arrived to find the front door slightly open and the inside of the house eerily silent. They followed a trail of red droplets down to the basement, where they were met with a chilling scene. Lying face down on the cold concrete floor was Bashir Khan, motionless and soaked in blood. A bloodied metal rod rested nearby, and crouched in the corner, trembling and in shock, was Amina Yusuf. She was covered in blood, her hands shaking, her hijab slipping off her head. She looked up at the officers as they approached, but said nothing, at first. When she finally spoke, her words were fragmented and frantic. She claimed that Bashir had attacked her after she tried to end their secret relationship. She told officers he had become violent and aggressive, threatening to expose everything to Fareed. She insisted she acted in self-defense, that she had no other choice. Officers secured the scene and took Amina into custody for questioning. Fareed, who had been working a late shift at the time, was called and informed of the tragedy. He arrived at the scene stunned, unable to process what had just happened. His wife, his father, and the quiet life he thought he knew had collapsed in a single night. Detectives began piecing together the story, but early evidence quickly raised doubts about Amina's version of events. The scene didn't match a typical struggle. There were no defensive wounds on her body, no signs of forced entry or resistance from Bashir. The metal rod used as a weapon had been stored in the utility cabinet, deliberately taken out. Forensics determined that Bashir was struck from behind, not in the heat of a struggle, but in a surprise attack. What troubled investigators further was Amina's digital trail. Her phone had been recently wiped, but forensic experts managed to recover deleted files and messages. Among them was a text message sent 2 days before the murder. It read, "He's talking too much. We need to handle it before he ruins everything." It wasn't sent to Bashir. It was sent to an unknown number that wasn't listed in her contacts. The discovery shifted the case from a domestic dispute to something more calculated. CCTV footage from nearby homes showed no intruders entering the property that night. But inside the Khan house, surveillance cameras, ironically installed by Fareed himself, captured footage of Amina leading Bashir down into the basement under the pretense of fixing a leak. He followed her willingly, with no sign of aggression. Minutes later, only she came back up. The narrative of self-defense was unraveling. Amina's calm demeanor during initial questioning began to change as more evidence was presented. Her story shifted subtly with each interrogation. She claimed memory gaps, emotional confusion, and insisted Bashir had manipulated her for months. But none of it explained the deliberate nature of the killing. As the investigation deepened, authorities began to suspect that Amina hadn't acted alone. The murder looked less like a spontaneous act of fear and more like a planned execution. And someone else, just outside the frame of that night's events, had played a much larger role. As detectives continued to sift through digital records and evidence, a name began to surface repeatedly: Imran Yusuf, Amina's older brother. Though he hadn't been seen near the Khan household in months, phone logs revealed numerous calls and encrypted messages exchanged between him and Amina in the weeks leading up to the murder. At first glance, their communication seemed like ordinary sibling chatter, but upon closer inspection, patterns emerged. Phrases and references that hinted at a brewing plan. Phrases like, "The basement is perfect," "We wait for the right time," and "It'll all be over soon," raised alarm bells. Investigators obtained a warrant and raided Imran's flat in Birmingham. There, they found printed photos of Bashir, a crude, hand-drawn layout of the Khan home, and a burner phone. On the phone were more deleted messages between him and Amina, several of which had been successfully recovered. One message, dated 3 days before the murder, read, "He'll never see it coming. We do it quick, no mess, no noise." It was now undeniable. Amina had not only planned her father-in-law's murder, but she had enlisted her brother's help to carry it out. Interviews with family acquaintances painted a clearer picture. Imran had always held resentment toward the Khan family. He believed Amina had been forced into her marriage and treated more like a servant than a wife. He never forgave Bashir for the way he had taken over their lives after Amina moved in with her in-laws. Although they had not been close in recent years, the secret affair and Amina's growing fear of exposure rekindled their connection, this time fueled by anger and a shared desire to destroy the man who now posed a threat to them both. On the night of the murder, Imran had traveled to London in secret, arriving after midnight. Security footage from a nearby petrol station confirmed he was in the area around the time of the killing. He slipped in through the back garden, where an unlocked utility door provided entry to the basement. Amina had lured Bashir downstairs, claiming the washing machine had flooded again. While Bashir bent down to inspect the corner of the room, Imran emerged from the shadows and struck the fatal blow. The plan had been rehearsed. Amina would act shocked, call for help, and claim. Bashir had attacked her, but things unraveled faster than they expected. Imran panicked and fled before Amina could clean up the scene properly. In her haste to stick to the plan, she made several missteps, forgetting to lock the utility door, deleting only some of the messages, and inconsistently describing the events to police. These errors, combined with digital evidence and forensic inconsistencies, exposed the truth. In court, the prosecution laid out the timeline with chilling precision. Amina and Imran were both charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The jury took less than a day to convict them. Amina was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 22 years, while Imran received 25 years without parole. Farid never spoke publicly about the case. He quietly divorced Amina, moved to a new city with his children, and cut ties with both sides of the family. The Khan home was eventually sold. To the outside world, it was just another house. But to those who remembered the headlines, it stood as a haunting reminder that the deadliest betrayals can come from the people we trust the most.